Welcome to the Bloomberg stage at Founders Forum. I'm Lizzie Burden. If you've been with us all day, you'll know that this stage is being broadcast live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg terminal. It's the only on-record stage here at Founders Forum. What an amazing gathering we have. What an amazing group of people, as we always have each year at Founders Forum. Our next conversation is going to be hosted by Stephanie Flanders, Bloomberg's Global Head of Economics and Government, and she's going to be speaking to Martha Lane Fox. The title of this panel is From Dotcom Pioneer to Digital Powerhouse, which is exactly what you are, Martha. So we hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Lizzie. We should say your proper title, if only because of where we are, Baroness Lane Fox of Soho. I sort of feel like you should get, you could have had a discount from Nick Jones if it could have just been Soho.
Oh, I see, I didn't even make that connection. I'm so dumb. When I asked the guy that you have to ask for a title, which is in this kind of strange, small building in the middle of the city, he literally, his jaw dropped, and he thought I could have asked him, whether he was going to steal one of his children. He was so horrified that Soho might be a place he'd have to put in a title.
But were you the first one, though? Because presumably they can't have any more than one. I think that's brilliant. But you don't have, and then does the coat of arms that you had to pick?
A coat of arms.
I thought you were supposed to select when you go into the House of Lords. You're supposed to have
That's optional.
I think you could have had some fun with it.
Could have had some fun.
Anyway,
I did it because Lucky Voice, my karaoke joint, started in Soho, so that's why.
No, absolutely. So you're practically the sort of patron saint of Founders Forum.
No,
and I think most
really
of the people, I think you are kind of spiritually the patron saint of it.
No, this is all
Well, you
Brent.
have just pointed out to me that you've been to every single one, and you sort of feel that you can't possibly not come, which I think is good. But having been from your sort of peak entrepreneur days, which we may talk a little bit about in passing, but you've then, I think, the thing that you're most known for now is the way that you have been actively involved, and Brent has also done some of this, shaping policy and thinking in government and sort of the surrounds of government and innovation, technology policy, the connections between innovation and technology and society. So I think and I guess most recently, the president of the British Chambers of Commerce, which I'm personally fascinated by because it has a very kind of crotchety, old-fashioned reputation, and of course you are the first woman to be president of the British Chambers of Commerce in 160 years. I've been badly briefed.
No, that's not true. I can't possibly forget Ruby McGregor-Smith was the president. So no, it's actually quite an impressive bunch of women that work in the chambers and across the network. So yeah, no, I can't possibly.
All right. Well, as you, I'm fascinated to hear about. Well, we should just start there actually, because I think often, and it's one of the sort of things that one would observe looking at British economic history, actually, that for at least a sort of 120 years or so, we had a fantastic innovation and development. The city of London was this great powerhouse, was a financial centre of the world, until very recently, many people would say, is still a major financial centre. For quite a long time, it has been bad at channeling resources and investment to the heartland of UK industry, and there's been lots of sort of thinking over the years about why that was. So I'm interested, there's people here who are sort of fretting about the size of the London Stock Exchange, the failure to get IPOs. Obviously that is important in many contexts, but how much does it matter to your members?
Oh, it matters. It does matter because our members are pretty representative of the British economy. Our makeup is about 85% SMEs, and that's obviously reflective of the broader economy. And they're all trying to grow, and they all need access to capital. Business doesn't stand still whether you're running a cheese wrapping factory, yes, I've been to one, or whether you're running a racehorse training college, yes, I've been to one of those too. So it does matter, and the dynamics of the tech sector are just kind of like the dynamics of the normal economy on steroids. But when I've been travelling about in the businesses that I've met, lots of the things that they're concerned about are obviously to do with regulation, to do with the current kind of political moments, and particularly when they see me and see someone coming from London or somebody that might have been to Number 10. But at the same time, financing your business, making sure you can grow as you want to, making sure you can export, all these things still rely on the same kind of dynamics. So it does matter, and I don't see many businesses in our network that are just cruising along. I think that there's a kind of caricature that perhaps we've got this productivity challenge in the UK because we've got a lot of businesses that aren't really thinking about the future, that aren't investing in things. And that's probably true, but I don't think those businesses are doing it knowingly. I think they're just still all working incredibly hard to survive, and that puts a different kind of pressure on you.
And you're seeing it, the coalface. I mean, I should apologise because Michelle Hussein was originally going to do this, and I suspect she's slightly less obsessed than I am with the shortfall in UK productivity. But if you look at the numbers, we have our most productive firms and most successful companies, I'm sure many of them are represented here, are the most probably more productive and more successful than the sort of top 10% in Europe and indeed the US. The problem is you've got 90% who've basically had flat productivity, which is extraordinary and historically unprecedented, certainly since the global financial crisis and possibly going back to earlier than that. One of the key things that points to is a lack of diffusion of sort of best practice. We used to have a bit more of, and now there's something blocking the diffusion of innovation and good techniques, good management skills to that broader mass of companies. So do you see that in practice? And how do you think, if you're Peter Carr, how are you going to fix it?
I'll leave that to Peter. But my take on it is, you're absolutely right. It's a lot about dissemination of a bunch of different things, not just technology. I am interested in how British managers rank in global terms, and it's not great. We're not good at managing people in and out of businesses. We're not good at managing, investment in skills or investments full stop in businesses. So that's a kind of cultural piece that's quite interesting, isn't it? I've got lots of theories about it. I think that business is a funny kind of it has a sort of funny narrative to it in the UK. And one of the things that I've enjoyed in my career is that I've never had to be in a traditional business, not really. So you can kind of define what a business looks like. But I realise for most people that's not true at all, and that you come at something with a whole separate set of preconceptions, if you like. And I still think that we don't do a very good job at telling a story about why business is important, why it matters to run them well, why it's absolutely fundamental for all the other things we want to do in society. And I'm not blaming Bloomberg, of course, but I think the British media has quite a lot to do with that as well. I reflect on how many millions of interviews I've done over the years where one of the first questions will always be something about a point of failure, or something about something that's gone wrong, or something about something that's not so great in the landscape, as opposed to thinking, how is this business contributing, or how have your experiences about, how businesses can help a community. So slightly long answer to your productivity question, it's absolutely about how we invest in technology and disseminate new technologies, but it's more than that, in my opinion. It's also about the culture that we have in businesses, people feeling that it's a great thing to run a business, to work in a business, to own a business, to think about business, and how that then has a broader impact in society.
It is funny. I mean, people used to say we didn't have enough of a kind of risk-tolerant culture. And I think that's probably still true relative to the US. But I would say compared to Europe, it's felt for a few decades now like we were fostering a greater sort of willingness to fail. You certainly have way more people. When I left university in the early 90s, I could probably name on a couple of people who were going into business, actually entrepreneurs. In the last 20 years, I would say that's become extremely common. Everyone's setting up, that you have to set up a business before you go and do something else. So why is it that shift is somehow now, in the last 10 years or so, doesn't seem to have translated into that kind of dynamism and growth?
Well, I think it's a couple of different reasons, but I agree with you. It's super important to remember the trajectory. When we were starting lastminute.com back in the dawn of time, people would walk away from me at parties when I said I was starting a business. Not that I ever got to parties because we were starting the business, because it was such a strange and weird thing to want to do, and such a strange and weird idea that the internet was going to be anything. And there was that kind of excitement with Tony Blair's arrival, and it felt like Britain was now going to be this place where you could come and you could grow something, and it was going to be a place where there was excited about ideas in a way that had not been true before. So that is a hugely different, it's hugely different now. And I think I read the other day that there's a business started every hour just in the tech sector alone. But I think we have to also be realistic that can sometimes be the same community of people talking to the same community of people about how great it's got for that community. And it's not that there isn't entrepreneurialism all over the place, of course there is. But I think that we have got a very uneven country. and that we haven't invested in skills and infrastructure and people and education in a way that has given, I believe, way more opportunity for more people to have become successful business people or entrepreneurs than we could have done.
If you talk to, I mean, Peter Carr was on this stage earlier, but if you talk to him or you talk to Rachel Reeves, I suspect what they would say is they feel like they've taken some difficult decisions, getting your fiscal house in order, whatever you think about that, but they're doing some things in order to but at the same time, they're doing difficult things, but they're also setting to work on things that will be fundamentally important over the next 10, 20 years, like planning reform, like another 100 billion worth of infrastructure investment. Does any of that, for your members, I'm sure they were all not happy at all about the increase in corporation or taxes on companies in one way or another in the budget, does any of that sort of, is that enough of an offset for them? Do they sort of accept that quid pro quo?
I think very much so, as long as this is it. I think that right now, 100 billion invested into infrastructure, small things that we have our member is Sizewell C, so Julia, who runs Sizewell C, thrilled, obviously, that finally, after 12 years or whatever it is, we can start building some nuclear power capacity in this country, and I'm 100% supportive of that. But I think that there's also a kind of anxiety that this has got to be paid for somewhere, surprise, surprise, and that there's going to be some secret hikes later in the year that people just don't know if they can cope with. So I think, as always, it's the balancing act when you're running the business, but people aren't ridiculous. They know that we need to invest in things in this country, and everyone I talk to when I've traveled, I'll take Sizewell C as a good example. Sizewell C is in Suffolk. I don't know if you've visited it, but it's pretty challenging in Suffolk for many reasons. The transport links, the road links, the food moving around the county links, they're all pretty difficult. It's a very, very tough environment, arguably a strange place to build 30% of our future capacity and energy needs, but that's what we're doing. And so we need to invest in that area, and a lot of that's going to come from Sizewell, and a lot of that's going to come from the associated businesses around it. So I think if you talk to any of our members, they'd get that, but they'd be just like, but keep your hands off my business rates and my insurance contributions.
I'm particularly familiar with those routes to Sizewell because my in-laws' house that they've had for 30 years, their sort of country, the sort of cottage that they went to, my husband went to all his life for summer, is being knocked down in order to make way for this road. But it also, their experience with that has demonstrated how long the process has been going, because it's been at least 20 years since they were first told that this road was going to go like right next to the house.
And I just think, sorry to finish that point, I know I've chosen to invest myself pretty heavily in the UK. I don't spend a lot of time travelling overseas as much as I spend travelling around the UK. And it's so important if you want to work and have influence in this country, I think, to really understand it. I'll give you an example. I think everyone should kind of study logistics because I think it's fundamental. But I was trying to get from Leeds, where I was doing an event, to Glasgow to do another event. And it was quicker for me to come back to London and go back to Glasgow. And we're a tiny country, and I just feel as though as long as we're screwing up these fundamentally simple things like how we travel about, how we train and skill people, and what our basic infrastructure, kind of technological infrastructure looks like, then we can't complain that we're not doing well, because we don't know yet, because there's so many things we can do to make the experience of starting businesses, running businesses, and all the bits around that much, much easier.
We had one of the few things I did when I was at the BBC that came close to going viral was a short film that was entitled "Is It Time for Britain to Let London Go?" And it was really just a way of doing the north-south divide, or regional differences. But even just in making that, which was mainly, it was not about London, it was about how the rest of the country was potentially being distorted by London's priorities. I sort of stumbled across and was embarrassed to stumble across what you've just described, because almost I realised, although I'd travelled as economics editor, I'd gone all around the country, but always from London, so you just don't get how bad the transport links are until you go from Leeds to Manchester, which is the Transpennine Express, which takes forever. So it's obviously mad that it's taken so long to get over that. We should sort of touch on some other things, because as you say, you're now particularly focused in the UK, and you've always been heavily invested personally here. But you have had sort of skirmishes with some characters, including Elon Musk. Can you just give us a little taste of that takeover of Twitter? And I guess you were among the people that were then departed from the board shortly afterwards. But Did you have a sense of where Twitter was going under his leadership?
Yeah,
immediately.
No, absolutely. And it was such a strange thing because many people here are on boards, and I think that boards are both the most overestimated and underestimated force in companies' life sometimes. And in my experience of being on every size and shape of board, really, you're kind of irrelevant until you're very, very much not. And those moments are suddenly very, very intense, and that can be a CEO transition, or it can be some extraneous event, COVID or whatever, or a takeover or an acquisition.
Or Elon Musk takes over your company.
Elon Musk. And I was laughing because I had been chairing the NomGov and the Nomination Governance Committee, in the Compensation Committee, and I'd helped with the activist investor and then with Jack's transition out of the company. I had a signal message from our GC, General Counsel, that said at the beginning of 2022, well, thank goodness me, the next few months will definitely be quieter than the last few months. And I was thinking, yeah, it was quite like being an exec. I'm looking forward to being a non-exec again. Fast forward 2 weeks only, and I got a text message from one of our board members saying, Elon Musk wants to join the board. And I thought it was a joke, but it wasn't, and the rest played out in public. I've got to separate my personal position and what was right for the company, I guess. And that was what was hard, because nobody joined that board to sell it to Elon, but it was absolutely clear we had to because the price was insane. And I feel as though the experience of it was pretty nuts, because seeing somebody close up and seeing how they operate, who has so much power, and this was 2-3 years ago, they've become an even more exaggerated person then.
I mean, that's what I'm interested, because the standard thing, I think it may have changed now, but the standard thing to say about Elon Musk was always, that as he's got more and more politically engaged, people have said, well, we're very disturbed by this, we don't like his policy, he seems to have gone down a strange political track, but, he's a master of innovation. He's, you have to admire all the XYZ things he's done. When you had that experience, were you changing your view of that, or you just think he's kind of gone astray in his involvement in more public things?
I don't think it's enough to have invented amazing stuff. I think you also have to be a person of high character. And I think if you demand attention in the public realm, it's even more important to have very high integrity. I think lots of people can do things under the radar and get on with it and build stuff, but that's not what he did, and that's not what he ever did. And he demanded attention, and from the minute you do that, I think you have a different set of values that you should be upholding. So I was never a massive fan, and I'm certainly not now. I feel slightly,
and the attention gave him enormous leeway that most people wouldn't get to blow up 80 rockets or whatever.
And he had a conversation with me, which is public record, so I don't feel bad saying it, where I said to him, you're pretty busy, why do you want to join the board of Twitter? It feels slightly like it's trivial. This is exactly what he said to me. I have solved the climate crisis by inventing electric cars. I will solve interplanetary space travel by getting SpaceX to Mars. I can save democracy by joining the board of Twitter. It was 4 a.m. his time, and I think he'd had a lot of ketamine.
No, but he says stuff like that all the time.
Allegedly.
I think he says stuff
like that. I know,
like
but I feel as though, that is not my value system, so I'm not sure I moved much in my regard for him. Not to take away from, the risk-taking and all this stuff, but it's risk-taking, in my opinion.
The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and it has a slightly overlaps with some of this, is, and anyone who heard the session I did this morning knows that I'm sort of a bit focused on this, but having just got back from Hong Kong, and I feel a lot of people that I've asked in the investment world and elsewhere recently, what's the thing that's really surprised you this year? Or in the last year, and you expect them to say something to do with Donald Trump and this, that, and the other. All of them have said nothing to do with Donald Trump. It's what's happened in China, and it'll be some development. Whether it's DeepSeek or the things that followed on DeepSeek, or how rapidly China has developed the electric car technology, but just generally being flabbergasted by how fast, under the surface, while we were still focused on the kind of slowdown in the macroeconomy at the micro level, China's going to win. On all these different, or at least that's the implication on all these sectors. So is that, particularly in the States, are the likes of Elon Musk and even people here just way too laid back about China and where China is?
I don't think I can possibly speak for what's happening in the States, but I feel we are too, I'm not sure if laid back's the word I use. I think uneducated is where I'd start. I think I'm clearly not expert, but the scales slightly fell from my eyes when I visited Felixstowe. I know this might sound surprising, but I was on the largest commercial container ship in the world. It's vast, even bigger than Founders Forum. And it's pretty startling when you see visually, obviously, something that is a manifestation of what is happening in the world. You know, those ships come in and they are 90% full of stuff, these huge containers of stuff, and they go out empty. And until I had seen that, and you really see just how screwed we are in the dynamics there, that I think it's quite hard to comprehend. So that definitely was a moment for me.
That sounds quite Trumpian. It's like, we've got to fill those
No,
ships
it wasn't
going
Trumpian.
back.
It was just an understanding of actually how things are moving around the world. It didn't make me think, therefore, anything. It was just like, wow, okay, we all need to understand this. In fact, worse than that, the things that were going back on the container ship was basically shit. Am I allowed to say that on Bloomberg podcast? I mean, sewage and stuff that we want to get rid of.
Historically, it was like recycling, and then we can't do that anymore.
Like, it's got worse. Anyway, so that kind of made me personally have a moment, and I feel like when I talk to businesses in the British Chambers network, people are probably quite connected to things in China, actually, interestingly. I think that, but I think in the macro community of people that I spend time with, I don't think we think about China enough or understand it enough. You know, it just feels like such a barrier for so many reasons, travel-wise, language-wise, all the rest of it. And the kind of classic narrative of Silicon Valley, and maybe to a degree here, I'm not totally sure, that, you know, don't worry because they just copy everything we do. It's so ridiculous, clearly, and so outdated. But I think it does permeate a little bit of arrogance that somehow it's not going to work because their systems are different, their people aren't free, their systems don't work for them, and all the things that I don't think are true.
And I think people were also sort of comforting themselves with the fact that they'd had this economic slowdown.
Yeah.
And even though we were talking about this earlier, even the housing crash there, people sort of somehow take comfort from, when in fact they did what successive advanced country governments had not dared to do for years. They actually sort of poked a hole in a housing bubble, which everyone else was desperately trying to keep up in developed countries. So I think, but my day job, we're constantly thinking about decoupling between the US and China, what the challenge it poses Europe, the UK, countries that are potentially stuck in the middle. Prime Minister's constantly saying he doesn't want to be stuck in the middle, but he hasn't really spelled out how he's going to do that. Again, just going back to your members, as you said, they are quite focused, or they are aware of what's happening in China. They might still be trading quite heavily with China and getting things from China. Where do you think they would like to end up in this grand? You know, where would they like the world to end up in terms of their relationship with China?
Well, I think that most of the people that I meet, and this is me speaking, not them as an official policy position, are collaborators, right? They're traders and collaborators, and I think that that's a real danger, of course, of where we are now, shutting down rather than opening up. And of course you want to do that with safeguards and national security safeguards and all the things that you would expect. But I feel very anxious if we're saying the world is going to play a place where we pit each other against each other. You know, I was at a conference in the US in May, and there was so much talk of winning and losing. And I don't think that's the world that we need to strive for. I think we should be striving for a world where we're winning, and where those ships are going back to China with some stuff on from us, and also bringing the stuff from them, and that is the world that we should be aiming for. And I don't think that's beyond the wit of, well, maybe man, but definitely not woman. And I think the Prime Minister has to tread a very careful course right now, clearly, but I would be very sad if it felt as though, because the US or general trend is towards being very anxious about China, it meant we were closed off to it. That feels very, very wrong to me.
We are in a world, like it or not, and I think many people don't, where certainly the President of America thinks we are in a win or lose world, thinks we're in a zero-sum world. But one of the implications of that is he's doing things that I think are quite costly to the US and could potentially leave a vacuum, an opportunity for, say, the UK. We were talking about this a little bit on a previous panel, but what do you think? Are there easy things that the government could be doing to attract some of the tech talent, the research talent that is now being either frightened off or literally kicked out of the US?
I mean, 100%. I mean, the first thing that comes back to me is we have to stick by our values. We absolutely have to, and we must not be tempted to be swayed by the headwinds coming from other places. For me, you know, the UK is a rich, culturally rich, diverse place. And I'm not sitting here as BMLF constantly going about there are not enough women in the tech sector, which there aren't. I'm actually talking about something even more fundamental, which is just a place which recognises difference and appreciates it and wants to work in a collaborative way with everybody. And that is such a strength. And I'd like to see the Prime Minister more actively using language that is open, welcoming, multicultural, if you like, from every axis. I think that's the place to start. Of course, then there's opportunity to poach people and to be smart about saying we're that place because we want you to be here. Not just in the tech sector. Anyone that's bright and has got a motivation to come and be and contribute to our economy, I believe we should be welcoming 100%. But I do think it needs to start with values, and I feel very anxious that businesses here, and I met someone the other day at a conference who was a UK tech business, and they were saying, well, of course, we've had to take everything about diversity off our website. And I said, why? And they said, well, because, what's happening? I said, what's happening? You don't have any US investors. You don't operate in the US. What is happening? And he was like, well, and I thought, well, is it actually that you don't want to have that on your website? And I felt that was maybe the answer that he was trying to give me, but didn't want to say it to me. So I'm not, again, trying to pull it back into that debate, but I do think starting from what our values are is the right place.
Baroness Lane Fox of Soho, and now sometimes Felix Doe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.